I'm Robyn Lucas. I'm the chair of the Faculty Education Committee. I'm going to take a pretty backwards role today. We've got Dr. Frank Beard, who's the chair of the Assessment Subcommittee, is going to talk to you first about assessment. And then Frank needs to go, and Tony Gill, who is the chair of the Faculty Training Committee, will arrive about 3:30. And so if Frank goes and Tony hasn't arrived, you can ask me questions. I've been an examiner and was the lead examiner, so I can answer exam questions. I was on the assessment subcommittee, so I can answer those questions as well if we have a gap between the two. I'm just not sure when Tony will come. So I'm just going to hand over to Frank to talk about assessment.
Hey. Hi everyone, I'll just bring up a presentation. Just getting technology right on this. Okay, so the faculty's assessment scheme is linked to achievement of competencies. I'm sure you're all well aware of the competencies outlined in the key documents, the Advanced Training Curriculum, and also the 2016 Program Requirements Handbook, which I'm sure everyone's read well and need to be well across. So assessment composed of two different types of assessment, formative and summative, and I'll come back to the difference between those shortly. So the assessment process in the faculty is very much an emphasis on ongoing workplace-based assessment. So there has been a considerable reduced emphasis on end-of-training assessment since about 10 years ago, when you were required to submit bound volumes for assessment at the end of training as well as an exam. And assessment is also aligned as far as possible with developments in assessment within the college, which there's a fair bit of ongoing work in that space, and so there is likely to be a continued evolution of the assessment process. Coming back to formative and summative assessment, so formative assessment focuses on feedback and guidance to facilitate learning. So that's decisions made in consultation with trainees about what to learn and what areas need improvement, as opposed to summative assessment, which is much focus on judgment about trainee progression through the training program and completion of the program, and so that decisions made for the candidate and more high stakes pass or fail decision. And of course, formative assessment doesn't mean that it's optional. It's still required to undergo a certain number of formative assessment requirements through the program. In terms of methods of assessment, there's assessment of written outputs, so there's the learning contract reports that trainees need to put in for each learning contract they submit during the training program. There's workplace reports and professional qualities reflections, which is a new written output that's being assessed from this year. There's also a couple of assessments that focus on direct observation of performance. So there's oral presentations and also DOPS, so direct observation of practical professional skills, which can be a variety of different skills, but common ones are chairing a meeting, speaking at forums in the community, and media interviews, including practice interviews. And then there's the oral examination at the end of training. So workplace reports, these are key reports which you replace what the old bound volume to a large degree. So their aim is to demonstrate trainees' ability to undertake public health projects and produce high quality written work. You need to submit and pass 3 over the training, so it's recommended that that's spread out, so 1 per year, rather than leaving them a big rush towards the end, although some people can submit them earlier than that and get them ticked off. So there's a very wide range of projects. The public health trainees work across a wide range of areas, so it needs to be called a project where the trainee's taken a major role. Some examples: outbreak investigation, data analysis, literature reviews, and evaluation of policy. A trainee must be the sole author on at least one of those reports, and one must have some quantitative data analysis and interpretation focus, and no more than one of the 3 can be in a peer-reviewed publication, and that trainee has to be first author on. So the principle of that requirement is that published peer-reviewed papers go through a considerable amount of rewriting from co-authors. So requirements are you need the writing skills of the trainee, and if you're planning to sit the exam in that year by 31st of July the year you're going to sit the exam, you need to have passed 2 workplace reports. So it's very important that at least 2 have been submitted early enough to go through the assessment phase and get a result. So the preparation for that needs a careful bit of planning in terms of the windows of submission of workplace reports in advance. So the role of the trainee in workplace reports, obviously you've got to do the project and write the report. For submitting, very important to discuss with the supervisor the suitability of the content and quality before it's submitted, and also very important to familiarise yourselves with the marking criteria which are available on the training portal to ensure that the workplace report covers all the requirements. So if you did a report in your workplace that didn't cover all the areas that are outlined in the marking criteria, which are basically background and aims and methods, results and discussion conclusions and public health implications. If you've written an original workplace report which doesn't tick off on all of those, then the assessor is not going to be able to give you any marks for those relevant criteria. So there are ways to get around that, which include addressing those extra issues in abstract or an accompanying additional material, rather than just leaving holes. You're going to get 0 out of 10 for that particular criteria. Role as supervisor, to assist the trainee to identify what are the most appropriate reports to submit, and to supervise writing with feedback to improve, make sure that the content and quality is acceptable, and also needs to verify to the faculty that what the trainee's contribution to both the project and the report is, and that it's suitable content and quality to be submitted. Oral presentation assessments, so the requirements are 3 over the course of training, so 1 formative and 2 summative. So recommended that you do 1 formative in the first year and then a summative in the subsequent years. However, you can be encouraged to do as many formative presentation assessments as you want, because that can be a good opportunity to learn and get feedback before moving on to summative presentations. You obviously don't need to go through the assessment process, but don't need to submit the results to the faculty after the first formative one. So requirements for the actual presentation, so it needs to be at least 10 minutes long plus question time. And so the state, territory, Jerry Murphy presentations are an excellent opportunity, but you can't, if you get through to the final at the college annual scientific meeting, you can't use that as a assessment, because you've already done the presentation and had feedback, rationale for that. And if you're going to sit the exam to be eligible, you need to have completed 1 formative and 1 of your summative with a pass, or you can sit the exam. Presentation, role of the trainees to identify opportunities to present, which there should be plenty, and arrange for appropriate assessors. So for the summative, that needs to be 2 faculty fellows, which must not include the supervisor, but can use the mentor. And for the formative presentations, 2 fellows, preferably not the supervisor, although they can do it at a pinch, but not recommended. Familiarise yourself with the marking forms, so you know how you need to structure the presentation. Again, like workplace reports, know how you're going to be assessed. You can structure things appropriately, and ensure the assessors, particularly if you're using assessors who may not have done this regularly, ensure they understand the process, have the right forms, and so in the case of the summative forms, be aware that they do their own forms and then come together and do up a consensus form for you to submit to the faculty. Role of the supervisor, and assist you to identify opportunities to present and support you in practice presentations, including feedback. The oral examination, obviously a summative assessment close to the end of training. So to be eligible for sitting the exam, you have to have completed the 29 units by 1st December in that year you're sitting. So they're centrally organised, usually held in the college offices in Sydney every year in November. So candidates for the exam get 45 minutes of reading and prep time, and the exam itself is an hour long, so that's 2 30-minute blocks, each with a separate panel of 3 examiners. And content addresses key areas of public health as per the curriculum. 8 questions in total, 4 with each panel. That works out about 7 minutes per question. Everyone now gets the same set of 8 questions, and in recent years, which is likely to be the same this year, those 8 questions have included a plain language and epidemiology and an Indigenous health question, and 5 others. So in general, the questions have moved over time and now are very much scenario-based rather than content-based. So they require candidates to apply knowledge to a real-life scenario and explain how they'd respond to that situation in a practical sense, not just recalling factual rote knowledge. So eligibility for this year, so by setting the exam in November 2016, by 31st of July this year, you must have completed one formative and one summative presentation, oral presentation with a pass. You must pass 2 workplace reports, 1 directly observed professional docs, and must still have medical registration equivalent to the eligibility requirements to enter the program, and also paid the relevant fees. So maximum of 3 attempts at the exam are allowed, and it must be completed within the maximum training time, which I get exactly what I think it might be 7 years. Robyn, can you?
Yeah, I'd have to check whether it's 7 or 8. I've got a feeling it's 8, but we just have to fit in with what the college has. It used to be 7 for us, but I think it might be 8 so that it's consistent with the college.
Marking in the exam, so pass, you need an overall score of 6 or more across your 8 questions. So 2 examiners give a score of 4 or less on a question, it's a fail, and an average score of 4 or less on any question is a fail on that question. So you're not allowed to fail more than 2 questions, and just get a pass-fail outcome. The outcomes of that are available, so a date is advised at the time, which is 2 weeks after the exam, and that amount of time is required because there's a lot of work in terms of checking and rechecking and preparation of feedback to candidates, particularly unsuccessful candidates. Which there has been in the last couple of years, there's borderline candidates, which is between 5.8 and 6. Then those candidates are offered a supplementary examination on the day after the final exam session. So any candidates that are sitting the supplementary, they get a fairly similar process. So further 8 questions, different questions, then with 2 different panels of examiners, and then the marking is averaged across all 16 questions rather than the initial 8. And so again, you need the pass and overall score of 6 or more across all the 16 questions. And all candidates who would like the opportunity to be offered a supplementary exam, if they're eligible for one, will be told on that day straight after the exam whether they're being offered one or not. You're not told whether they've passed or failed at that time, just whether they're being offered a supplementary exam. And the process for actually communicating that is still under review. There's a couple of different ways have been tried, and there has been feedback that it's a stressful and difficult task to communicate, and we'll try to work out how to optimise that. And if there is a supplementary exam, there's a short break, and we start again with the reading and preparation time. Moving on to the direct observation of practical professional skills docs. So that's formative assessment and one and compulsory. So now it's actually built up from 1 to 2, and now it's 3 over the course of training from this year. Must have completed and submitted 1 by 31st of July if you're planning to sit the oral exam this year.
I think actually, Frank, that will, because this was based on 2015 when you only had to do 2, I think now we will have moved DOPS right forward, and so you'll need to have completed 2 by 31st of July for 2016.
I did check what's in our papers, and it said 1.
Oh, it still said 1? Okay, whatever's in the training handbook, that's what we'll do. It should have been moved on, but if it says 1 in the training handbook, that's what it'll be.
Yeah. I thought it would have been 2 because we moved on,
yeah.
But...
It should have been.
So as I said, includes direct observation of a range of activities, and the assessor can be your supervisor because it's a formative assessment. It can be supervisor, another fellow. It doesn't have to be a fellow if you. It just needs to be a public health practitioner with a senior experienced person with relevant experience. Because if you're chairing a meeting, it doesn't necessarily need to be a fellow to comment on how well you chair a meeting. A lot of non-fellows can assess that and give you appropriate feedback very appropriately. Professional qualities reflection. That is a new assessment requirement which is compulsory from this year. So again, it's going to phase in 1 over the course of training this year to 2 from next year, and then 3 in 2018. And I'm sure most people have had relatively recent medical training, will have done professional reflective pieces in their training. It's fairly common and widespread. The principle of requiring you to identify a situation or something that's happened, a piece of work, and reflect on the elements of professionalism that are involved. Domains 1, 2, and 6 competencies, so like communication, advocacy, cultural competence. So trainees' role is to identify something that's impacted on them professionally, so particularly dilemmas or difficult situations, interactions with colleagues, complete the online form and submit it via the training portal to the supervisor, and then organise to meet with the supervisor to discuss the event and the reflections and plans to modify practice and move forward. The supervisor role to use form to guide discussion of the event and encourage critical reflection into issues and insights, and facilitate the trainees considering further professional development arising out of the event and the professional qualities curriculum. So, summary of the summative assessment component and formative assessment components of the training program. So got up here for trainees who were in the program last year, so what the requirements were last year and also this year, and next year 2017 proposed requirements which just yet haven't been formally signed off on. So this year, the changes since last year is now 3 DOPs required over the course of training as compared to 2, plus the 1 professional qualities reflection, which wasn't in last year. And then the proposed changes to next year will be that there will be 2 PQRs, and the requirements for the exam will expand to 2 DOPs and 1 PQR. And this is another summary slide, essentially cutting, summarising assessments in a slightly different way. So much same as what I've already said, and just a summary of which ones are summative and formative and how they're assessed. So I might leave that up. I've probably got time to take a few questions. Has Tony arrived?
No, he hasn't, but if you take some questions until you have to leave, and then I'm happy to answer questions also.
So do we have any questions online? That was obviously a lot of information.
Can we hear any of the trainees?
Yeah. Is there anyone out there?
Hi Frank, we've just got a question from Peter Schrader here, who says, with required assessments changing every year, which set of criteria do different cohorts of students follow?
Everyone needs to follow the current program requirements handbook for that year. So everyone should be using the 2016 program requirement handbook.
So it doesn't go on cohort. It's got nothing to do with cohort. The only thing that will have anything to do with cohort will be the research projects which come in as a requirement in 2017, and nobody at the moment will need to worry about that requirement. But it's a college policy that we don't have this. It doesn't depend when you start the training program. What is required is what is in the handbook for this year. So the 2016 requirements apply to everybody in 2016. So even if you started in 2012, before you had to do DOPS or PQR or any of those things, you have to do DOPS and PQR, and you have to do the number before the exam that are required in the 2016 handbook.
So with the more major changes, like the new things like the DOPS or the PQR, that's why if you look at this slide, at subsequent years they're phased in and go from 1 to 2 to 3. So the principle of that being that certainly if a trainee is at least a full-time trainee, then they're not going to be having to do 3 of anything in a particular year. So it'll be only,
Yeah, that's why we phase them in like that.
Any,
Does that make sense? Yeah?
I know I found it hard to get my head around as well.
So the answer is, so the most critical thing for each student is what is required if they want to do the exam in that particular year?
Yeah, so that will be governed. What they need before they are eligible to sit the exam in that particular year will be written up in the handbook for that particular year. So it doesn't matter what it is now. If you're sitting in 2019, whatever's in the 2019 handbook is what you'll need before the exam.
He says, great, thank you.
And make sure your supervisors read the updated handbook every year as well.
Any other questions?
For anyone else who can't use their microphone, you can use the chat function. If you hover your mouse over the screen, there's a gray tab that appears at the bottom. The two chat bubbles on the left you can use as a group chat, or you can write a message directly. Otherwise, we'll provide the email addresses of, we've got another question from Mohammed. He says, hi Frank, I am an OTP and a prospective trainee. I have been advised to fulfill certain training requirements during 12 months top-up training. If I'm appearing exam in 2017, do I have to fulfill the requirements set by OTP committee at present, or I have to follow the faculty requirements as you mentioned?
Is that an assessment question, Robyn, or is it more
So Mohammed, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, and my understanding is that if you're appearing for the exam in 2017, then you need to have fulfilled sort of the equivalent of 1 year of training for 2017. So that will mean 1 workplace report, 1 summative oral presentation assessment, 1 DOPS, and 1 PQR by 31st of July. So it's a big year if you're just doing it because you're just doing it a 1 year before you sit the exam. We can certainly get that absolutely clarified for you, but that's my understanding of it.
Okay, Robyn, I'm going to go to this other meeting, so I'm happy for you to forward my email afterwards. If there's any follow-on questions that arise.
So Lachlan, you couldn't see the presentation. Did you see it eventually?
Yeah, he managed to get it. It appeared.
Okay, so Tony's here now. Perfect timing.
There
you go. So are we, okay, 1 PQR is an additional component for me. Yes, by 2017, the trainees will have to do 2 PQRs. So I think it's appropriate that you do 1 PQR. It's a fairly minimal assessment. It requires you, you'll see the forms are online, but it requires you to just write a reflection, really, a short reflection on something that's happened in your training. It can be an event or a report or some interaction that you've had with the supervisor. And it's simply a matter of saying, you'll see all the guidelines online, but it's about saying, you know, this is what happened, this went well, this didn't go well, what could I have done to make it go better, what might I have learnt from this in terms of going forward, and so forth. So it's not like writing a workplace report. It's not an onerous requirement at all. So Tony's here. Will we do his presentation and then we can do more questions afterwards? So Nina, do I just press the start sharing button?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to put it in presentation mode, you can do that. Otherwise, we can see it as it is. It's really your preference.
So how do I put in presentation mode? Yes. Oh yeah, okay. I did. Thought I did.
Right, there we are. So what I'm talking about here are the other aspects around the training program. I'll probably go through some of this fairly quickly, but as you can see, I'm lead fellow and chair of the Faculty Training Committee, and 6 years ago I was a trainee. 7 years ago I finished as a trainee. So I come a bit of an overview about learning contracts and contract reports. Just some points of contact. Most of your contact will generally be with Natasha Alonso, who looks after the training, and for assessment also go to Natasha in the first case, and for examinations there's a separate point of contact.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I think that you're sharing through the PowerPoint presentation rather than the screen. So if you want to just go back to the arrow at the bottom.
Right.
Okay, and then just the little play button. If you click on that and click Share Display 1 rather than PowerPoint presentation. So if you just hover your mouse over the screen, there's a grey tab that should appear at the bottom.
So we're in PowerPoint, the full PowerPoint screen, Nina.
Yeah, so what's happening is because you're sharing through the PowerPoint document, we can't see the presentation displaying on the screen as it is, which is why you have to share through your display 1. So by clicking, just stop sharing and then we will reshare it again.
In slideshow.
So just exit out of that by pressing Escape, top left. Okay, very good. And then in the actual video conference, if you want to go back to the play button.
In the video conference. Okay.
So just in the video, the screen where you see the video conference.
Camera privacy.
Yeah,
No,
so that's right. So the play button towards the left.
Oh, play, yes, I see the one you mean now, yep.
So if you click on that, and then you stop sharing.
Stop sharing?
Yep. And then we'll click it again after you've done that, and we'll start sharing again. But if you can click Display 1 instead of the PowerPoint presentation.
Right. Done. Right, it says video desktop connected.
Okay. Perfect. So now we can see your screen. So if you just bring up the PowerPoint presentation, it'll appear as it does on your screen.
There. So that's there now for people. You can see that now.
Yep, and if you want to put it in presentation mode, now it'll come through perfectly.
How's that?
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, good. Well, I will now go through. I just covered that slide. I suppose a reminder all around for the training program that it's an adult learning training program and you as trainees are responsible for your training. I suppose it's no difference to uni or other things, but in the end, the emphasis is on you to submit everything in time, not for us to chase you up all the time for it. So you are responsible for your training and organising your training. So it's probably just a gentle reminder. As you're aware, there's broad curriculum that need to be covered, and they're listed there. So a reminder that the core training, we tend to use units and months interchangeably. So the core training is 36 units, where a unit is a month full-time equivalent. So obviously if you do work part-time, then it takes long to achieve a unit and therefore get the total units of 36 units. The content required is obviously what's in the advanced training curriculum and professional qualities curriculum. Supervision, I think, is just a reminder that for any period of training for which you get for which you seek approval through a learning contract and then report on, you require to have a AFPHM supervisor, or if the workplace supervisor does not have a AFPHM, there must be a AFPHM as your co-supervisor. They don't necessarily exist and have to be in the same workplace, but it is somebody who obviously understands the curriculum, other issues, who working with your workplace supervisor acts as a supervisor for your training. The other thing you all should have is a mentor, and a mentor will be a AFPHM, but you can seek special dispensation. Most of you, obviously, as you're already in the training program, should have a mentor, and it is generally envisaged that your mentor is someone who follows you through all of training and is a bit of a constant. So obviously every time you move a job or whatever, you can have different supervisors. So the teaching and learning requirements you need to do in a year, so a 12-month period, you should have at least one learning contract for the year. If you're working part-time, it's still one learning contract, but you're allowed. But if you change jobs or significantly change in a job, then a new learning contract's required to cover the work you'll do in the period of that training. We have the National Training Days. These are recommended, not compulsory, and as you might have seen in correspondence that has gone out, that we'll be having a single National Training Day on Saturday the 5th or whatever it is of May. I can't remember the exact date. It'll be in Adelaide. The following day, the Sunday, is actually the College Trainees Day, same location. And then on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is the college's annual meeting, which has a significant public health element to it. So this time we moved the National Training. Previously, they've nearly always been in Sydney, but we have moved it and put it in line with the actual college conference. Also, there'll be a number of training video conferencing. Again, they're recommended, not compulsory. They're also recorded and available afterwards if you can't actually physically attend them. And this one's obviously the first one, and there's one already organised for April. I might just flag that what we're trying doing the National Training Day is having interactive sessions rather than lectures like this. So sessions which are far better, where people can interact with the person who's leading the session and on topics which are probably less well covered by people in their workplace. Seeing you're all in, it's probably not worth saying what the actual entry requirements are, but the only thing I'm going to flag here is a reminder to those who, when they were made eligible, had some riders on their eligibility under their mapping of their MPH, or if they hadn't finished MPH, that you need to either have finished the missing core subjects or finish your MPH before you complete or before you can go past 12 units of training, so the equivalent of a year full time. If you have not completed your MPH or have not completed your other core subjects, then you cannot get any accreditation for any training you do until such time as you notify the faculty that you have completed the subjects or the MPH. And there will be a few of you in that situation. Just so you're aware, and if you're speaking to any of your friends, as of next year, people will need to have completed their MPH and have satisfied 3 of the 5 core areas, and will have the same requirement to do any outstanding core ones in the first 12 units. So so people just need to be aware of that. So obviously the training program, really it's an on-the-job work experience process where you're working and gaining experience and practicing it in supervised and supported environments. Again, comment about 36 units of training. It's obviously delivered through the workplace plus other sessions and other things that are made available. And the content you need to cover in a training program are covered by the learning objectives outlined in the curriculum. probably certainly for those who may be in their first year or even second year, you should be seeking a range of training opportunities, be they formal rotations, be they secondments or varied employment posts, to get a wide range of experience. Because noting the aim of the training program is for you to be able to experience different work which covers the different competencies that are required to be a public health physician. Overseas training as always comes up as an issue. You may take up to 12 units of training overseas, but it needs to be approved prospectively, and you also need to, for that period of time, have a AFPHM as a co-supervisor. It's probably unlikely you have a AFPHM if you're overseas, but otherwise you need a AFPHM as a co-supervisor to provide a discussion place, a person to also look at your learning contracts, learning contract reports, but to enable some discussions with you while you're overseas on maybe where there might be some differences in the work you're doing compared to what might be in Australia. So therefore, at least 2 years of your training must be completed in Australia or New Zealand. You can get credit for a maximum of 12 months from a PhD-related activity, but please note that 12 months of PhD, if you do that overseas, would count as 12 months of overseas training. Again, there's prospective approval if you're going to do a PhD which you aren't yet enrolled in. I mentioned the mentor before. The mentor is provide oversight of progress, but it's also an independent guidance for you as the trainee on matters related to training, your wellbeing, aspects of career development, and also if there's not someone else in the workplace, potentially someone else to discuss if you're having issues with your supervisor. So give someone who's outside of that chain as a person to comment. You also note that your mentor does have to sign off on your learning contract and learning contract report. We mentioned supervisor before. So you need, as mentioned, a supervisor, either AFPHM or at least a co-supervisor. And that's what the role of a supervisor is to help plan and facilitate with you your learning path, facilitate where there might be teaching and learning opportunities along the way, obviously provide feedback, term readiness for summative assessments, but obviously especially they get involved in signing both your learning contract and learning contract report, as well as helping you probably have opportunity to do things like the oral presentations. The learning contracts, there's been a little to-and-froing of timing, but in the end it's written by the trainee for the work they're undertaking in the position they're in. And obviously it's in liaison with your supervisor, and your supervisor signs it off. And what it is intended to be is, what are the activities that you're specifically going to do in that position, which are training activities, either against the competencies, they might be a project, it might just be the work you're doing there and what competencies it crosses over. I think it's fair to say that some of the issues we see with learning contracts is they maybe can be a bit thin on what actually people are going to do. They might say, I'm going to work in a public health unit and I'm going to cover competencies 1 to 25. We do ask for a bit more detail about actually what functions you're going to do and then align the competencies. For instance, if you're going to do a project of some sort, that might involve a number of competencies, but at least saying what are the different aspects you might be doing in the project. It might be research, might be then data collection, might be analysis, and might be a policy out the other end. That sort of detail is what we look for. As I mentioned before, you need 1 per 12-month period at least, and one per training position. So if you rotate to a different job in 6 months, you would need another learning contract. One of the issues that does come about is sometimes you have a plan at the start of a period, it might be a 6-month or 12-month, but things go somewhat astray because of other priorities that occur in the workplace. If it is a very significant change, and this is sort of, I know, a word it's a bit hard to define, then you would need a new learning contract. but otherwise you pick it up in your learning contract report if it's only slight variations. As I mentioned, you need to link activities to competencies expected, and I made a list there about some of the issues. Learning contract report needs to be completed within 6 weeks of completing a position, summarises all your activities and projects, and also therefore what competencies and to what level you have achieved them. So I've made there, if there are any other changes of significance, you might need to amend the learning contract for approval. And it might be that you plan to do a project and you're only going to take 0.5 of your time towards training. It might be in the end you spent 0.4 time or even 0.6 time. That would be a thing you could pick up in your learning contract report. Just again, some more about what you actually have in the learning contract report, and there is a room towards the end for a reflection on the training period. One of the issues and questions that always comes up is, if you've already achieved some competencies to the level required in the curriculum, do you need to list them each time? Because there might be there's a significant number of the competencies which are sort of things you nearly will do in any job. But once you've achieved it once, you don't have to repeat it on subsequent learning contracts, noting that at the end of the learning contract report, you do have the ability to show what you've achieved in that period in the way of competency, level of competency, and other in the previous periods. I think there's also a good use of that learning contract report when you're writing a new learning contract with your new supervisor or even the same supervisor to show what competencies you have already achieved as a start point in your discussions. I've mentioned all that already, and obviously they get signed off by a supervisor and mentor. A reminder that learning contracts are due within 4 weeks of commencing a position. I know some of the wording at times is slightly variable, but so there's at least 4 weeks. That does give you a chance for when you start in a position to have the discussions with the supervisor about what projects you're going to do during your period of time there, and getting sign off and then the learning contracts. The other important date is when the first workplace report submission is available to be submitted. Again, noting, as it probably came up before in the assessment part, you do need to have 2 successfully completed workplace reports by the end of July to sit the exam at the end of the year. Or take part in the oral assessment. That's actually not relevant because it's to do with new trainees. You're already in there, I think. Might be wrong. Did I miss to join the program and commence with training? Yes. Everyone.
Point out that there are questions in the group chat as well. Dr. I think you know how to get into there, so when you have a chance, feel free.
Yep, well, the second last slides, that's right.
And also keep in mind that the other people might not be able to read the question, so if you're able to just read the question out loud and then answer as well. Thank you.
That might have been covered before about the examination. New trainee. Second workplace report round. And just to really make you aware, and this is my last slide really, there are a whole lot of education policies of the college which are available on the website, and they are around things like academic honesty and plagiarism, accreditation of training settings, which you do need your training needs to be done in an accredited training position. Flexible training, which gives a policy, and certainly as a faculty, when there's been discussion in the college about flexible training, we're put up as a very good example of flexible training, the way it's allowed to be done. professional qualities, reflection, progression through training, which gives advice on those, and the recognition of prior learning. You need to note, for those who maybe have just commenced the training program, that you only have 3 months from the commencement of training to put in an application for recognition of prior learning. A couple of years ago it was 12 months, but it's now 3. It's been 3 months, and it's 3 months in the policy since the beginning of last year. Okay, now we'll get out of this. All right, so I get rid of that.
So if you just want to go at the bottom in that little dialog box and click on the green button and then just click stop sharing, there you go.
And I can start to see questions. All right, I'll go and find the first of the...
Okay, so this
yep, the date, yes. So it's, the date is the Saturday before Congress. So I think 14th of May, I believe, is the correct date. I haven't got it open in front of me, something with it, and didn't write it on there. So it's actually whatever the Saturday is, which I'm pretty sure is actually the Saturday,
I'll look it up.
We'll look it up. Right, next question. I'm in my final year. Do you want previously signed off competencies included in the learning contract? I answered good, so I've answered that question. If we apply for RPL and is approved, can this training account for specific competencies? Does this need an additional paperwork? All right, with RPL and the application for RPL, the process is you still need to generally put something like a learning contract in to cover that period of time, and you can show on that what competencies you achieved as part of that process. That does at least get the ability to show the competencies you've been involved in. And I think that's covered the 2 questions that are there at the moment. So are there any other questions? Or if not for me, are there any questions for Robyn as well?
I've just unblocked all the microphones. If anyone has a question, you're free to do so right now.
Okay, I've just got another question came through. You mentioned the work towards a PhD would count 12 months for training. What is the best initial step to discuss PhD training? Noting that what we're saying here, this is if you're doing, it's prospectively applied for it, and for the time that you're doing your PhD, if you ask for 12 months, because you're doing 12 months of PhD, you can't get any claim for any other time. You can't score more than 12 units in a year. So you need to speak to we need to put an application. So speak to your regional education coordinator, is probably the first person in this instance, and then you need to make some communication back to Natasha, through Natasha, to have it done. And also needs to be relevant to public health. Here's the Saturday the 14th. Any questions out there?
When you say relevant to PhD training, remember relevant to public health training, it's a really broad field. So, you know, it definitely requires a conversation with the faculty, probably the regional education coordinator, your supervisor, to make sure it's all going to be acceptable. But it is a really broad field and will cover a wide range of possible PhD.
So the next question here is about process consultant training. Liaise with Natasha on that. So what that is formally when you're requesting to be so sorry, I suppose you're putting your training on hold for multiple reasons. There's lots of different activities people might do, but you need, but in the first instance, go to Natasha at the public health email address, and she can fill you on to that. The other part of this question does apply if there's a time lag between completing and starting. I mean, if it's a short period of time you get accredited training is what's covered by your contract report. If there was a month or so gap, my understanding is that and if it takes a significant interruption for training, there is actually a fee as part of it. Natasha can certainly provide you that information. Another PhD question was somebody who is basically completing their PhD, which has been approved, and at the same time they finish their training time. Does the PhD need to be submitted? One would need to put in need to check. It's probably a good question. We might have to get back to you on that one. Robyn's also no, yeah. It doesn't have to be completed, but I'm not sure. Just confirm.
As long as there should presumably still be a
learning contract report.
Yeah. That year of PhD.
Yeah.
But I mean, we probably don't even care if you fail the PhD. If the learning contract and the learning contract report were acceptable, and that was acceptable training,
she wrote it down there. Well, I sort of put it on edit. It's just like it's her and Charlotte meeting with that down, and then she's got another meeting with that after.
Or just background conversation. But the person about the PhD has asked, as mentioned, is as much the research experience we have towards the awarding. And I think we're noting that a PhD doesn't take as short a time as a year to do. We can't, there might be 12 months towards a PhD. Any other questions? Certainly, if you think of any other questions, you could email them into Natasha, and if she doesn't have the answer straight away, she'll go out and seek it from us, if it's a specific one. I mean, you should note that the 2016 handbook is up on the website. Anything further? Robyn, is there any other questions on assessment that you had left over?
So a lot of this information we would normally cover on National Training Day, but National Training Day is usually 2 days, and this time it's a single day. And so the idea is that this webinar will cover off the things like we've just talked about, information about the training program, information about assessment, information about the exam. So this is your opportunity to ask the questions that you would normally ask at National Training Day.
Certainly, if you also have any other questions, there's also the regional education coordinators who can give you if it's a local issue. I think it's worth saying that if you do run into any issues with your supervisor, which you can't resolve, then there are, as I mentioned, there's always your mentor, or the other person you can go to is your regional education coordinator as a person maybe to have a chat with or liaise with. Because certainly if a supervisor has an issue with a trainee, they might go to the regional education coordinator as well. So the person's available. Next question, if we haven't submitted our learning contract by 4 weeks following starting date, what do we do? I would suggest it needs to be an ASAP. What might happen is when it comes in, it will only be allowed for 4 weeks, up to 4 weeks before for that. Next one is, for the oral exam, do we assume that we have to be available for 2 days put aside for it?
Yeah, so how many days the exam goes over depends entirely on how many candidates there are. So we have had times in the past where the exam period has gone for 4 days. If you want to be eligible, if you want to be able to participate in the supplementary exam process, then you need to be available when all of the main round of exams is finished, and that may be a day and a half or it may be 2 days. So yes, you can say, I'm only just coming for my exam on the first day and I'm going home, and I don't want to be, I'm not interested in being offered a supplementary exam, and that's absolutely fine. You know, it's completely your choice. We can offer a supplementary exam and you can take that opportunity or not. But obviously you can't take it if you've gone home.
Well, we won't know how many days until after 31 July to know who's actually sitting, and in fact, to get close to the time, who's actually paid fees and is definitely going to do the exam. So that won't be known to sort of probably the August-September period to be confirmed.
Yeah, so we normally have an indication because we know how many people are eligible to, likely to be eligible to sit the exam by about April, May. But of course, you know, people put their second workplace report in, maybe that won't pass, so then maybe they won't be eligible. So we often know an outside envelope, and we know that it'll be less than that. We get through, I can't remember now, we used to get through 6 candidates a day, but I think we get through 9 candidates a day because we now have 3 examiner panels going. But it just depends. And, you know, if we take the full 2 days doing exams, then supplementary won't be offered until a 3rd day. So people on the very first day, if they want that opportunity to be offered the supplementary, might have to make themselves available possibly for a 3rd day. So don't book too early.
Certainly, I think over the last 2 years, when this has been a possibility, the people who live locally have been put early in the process.
That's right.
And to allow those, certainly from the most distant areas, to be, if they wish, examined towards the end of the exam period because of that issue.
Yeah.
Probably the one policy I realised wasn't on the other slide is exceptional circumstances. And there might be circumstances which have arisen during a training period where people may wish to state that, you know, although they couldn't achieve something or do something in the time frame required. But that's a college policy. Again, when application exceptional circumstances. It's really for there when a non-favourable decision might be made. So, for instance, if someone had a learning contract report, which in the end of the supervisor basically said should only get a couple of units, and as the trainee disagreed with that, then there was also an appeal process.
So, Mohammed, my understanding, again, and you need to verify this with the OTP unit, is that it's 12 months of top-up and 12 months of peer review. So there's no 7, 8 years. Those years that you've been given, that's how many years it is. So that's the time limit.
Yes, certainly the OTP is coming in you're coming in from the side into sort of basically the last year, the equivalent of the last year of training, the last 12 months.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Sorry, could we please read that question out loud just to make sure that everyone...
It's really for overseas trained physicians. So Mohammed's coming in as an overseas trained physician and just doing 1 year that culminates in the exam. The number of attempts for the oral examination, I'm not 100% sure of the answer, Mohammed, so you'll need to check that with the OTP people. I think it's 1.
Yes, I think you might need to formally send an email in through the OTP area so it can be answered. So they deal with cases like yours.
As you can see, Mohammed, we don't have lots of people doing what you're doing, so we don't have lots of experience of that.
Any other questions? Well, one thing I'll put a little bit of a bid in. As we look at further webinars for the year, if trainees have any ideas of good speakers that I think could do a webinar for the benefit of others, they might already have had the lecture by the individual. We'd be certainly interested in knowing who those individuals who might do a good presentation on a good relevant topic are to help us set the program for later in the year. The registration for the training day commence. We're at the moment just working on the program because what we wanted to do in the first place was probably say what was on the program to give people an idea. I'm not sure whether in fact the training day registration is on the Congress page or not. Robyn's just having a look as we speak. But I think it's probably going to be a separate registration. We'll keep you informed through the weekly bulletins and all about when it will open. Certainly my understanding is the place we're running will take at least 50 trainees. But we'll be letting people know as soon. We thought it'd be better to have at least give you an indication of the program for the day. It is likely to start at 10 o'clock in the morning in Adelaide, which would allow most people to come in on the day rather than having to have another night's accommodation. And we're also looking at a social function for the evening, which we'll try. It's not going to be a dinner per se, but at least an activity so that those trainees who attend can all get together. And obviously there are other opportunities through Congress to do the same. In fact, Robyn was only mentioning at our education committee yesterday, there is a good, strong public health line in Congress. There are 2 very specific public health. There's the Jerry Murphy competition, and then all the John Snow, which are the the medical student presentations also occur. So that's 2 sort of very specific public health, plus other public health aspects to the streams.
Yeah, so there's a social determinants talk being given by Sir Harry Burns, who's coming from the UK. We have the Red Fern oration being given by Dr. Sue Morrie, who from the Sue Morrie Medal for the final exam fame. We have a session on new approaches to tobacco regulation, a session on using big data, and a session on early childhood determinants of health from a sort of a public health point of view. And then there are some other sort of guest talks by various people. So I think it should be quite good.
Any further questions?
Sound like an option there.
I know, well, it's not a bid. Fortunately, there's no prize at the end if you ask a question or do the last question. I know that this will be available as a inverted commas podcast. I think it's sort of a YouTube video, so you'll be able to see everything that's been said, and obviously for those who haven't attended the webinar will get a chance to look at it later. Just another question, can we do any retrospective accreditation from others trained towards FAFM? Just so the person who wrote it, is this where somebody's done training in, say, general practice or physician training, and they want to use that time? Because if it was that's the question, then my understanding is you can't double count. Well, you certainly can't double count when you're in the training program, so that would tend to me to be that you probably can't count other formal training, so physician training as to get it accredited. What recognition of prior learning tends to be where, well, we certainly had examples of people who have been working in the equivalent of public health units or public health functions for maybe 6 months prior at some stage.
I mean, you would have to think about it with your supervisor and mentor. I mean, I can probably imagine some elements of physician training that we might be prepared to accredit under recognition of prior learning, but that would require, there's nothing automatic. So you would have to, within 3 months of joining the training program, you would have to submit a recognition of prior learning, giving detail of what you thought was learning that should be accredited or should be, you should be allowed to use as public health medicine training. So you can give it a shot if you really think that it is public health medicine training.
I would suggest you look at the recognition of prior learning policy. As I say, I'm pretty sure that it's got, and in the handbook, I'm just flicking through the handbook, there was a known issue that you couldn't count the same time towards 2 training programs if you're in it. But I'm not.
So I think the answer is to look at the recognition of prior learning documentation, but there certainly isn't any sort of dual training thing where you can count units done in physician training, directly count them as public health medicine training. They're separate.
Yeah, let's take a look through the handbook just to confirm, let's check if there's anything there. It doesn't. I know it's somewhere around, there's a policy. Well, I don't have any of the policies. All right. Any other late questions? Not late, it's still part of the time frame. As Robyn said, here's your chance. Obviously, there are other chances. You can speak to the RECs, you can email Natasha in the Public Health Training Office.
We can make our emails available to you as well, so that you can email any of the 3 of us afterwards if you think of something.
Another question. Correct. Somebody has asked, they've actually given the answer, as I'm assuming the answer is no, but just to check that none of the MPH research project can be used for the workplace or workplace report. You can't use anything for your MPH or work tuning your MPH as to do with your faculty training time. And so therefore the MPH research project could not be used for the workplace report. I know there has been I think I can know of one case where a report, which was very much a public health report, was sort of put in as under sort of recognition of prior learning, but that would actually be an answer for the assessment, for Frank and the assessment committee, as distinct from me.
I mean, you can have an MPH research project which finishes, is completed, is assessed as part of your MPH. Then there might be work arising from that which you are working on during your placement, and that might be possible to develop as a workplace report, but it's a bit, you know, it's really a new piece of work that you're doing actually during your training time.
Yeah, noting that the MPH is the sort of the pre-requirement, yes, using that word doesn't quite fit. The advanced training. Any other questions? Noting there is a delay to when I think someone types and we get to see it, but otherwise, and as we've reached 5 minutes to go. Well, thank you all very much for attending this, either those who have attended in person today or those who are watching this in the future. Hopefully we've provided you with answers to some questions and given you the background to all the training. And but as Robyn and I have said, if you have any specific queries, then there are people to ask that arise from here. Good luck in your year of training, especially for all of you who are intending to sit the oral exam later this year. Enjoy the year. I remember it well. Well, not so well. I did get through, so it was probably well.
I remember it well when you did it too.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Lucas and Dr. Gill. I think we'll just close the video conference now. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
You know the